So Romans chapter 8 today and verse 18. Carson read some of that during our call to worship, and we're going to look at that text again here in just a few minutes. So we're in the book of Romans, and we're currently in Romans chapter 8. And the letter of Romans is written by the Apostle Paul. It's written to Christians in Rome around 57 AD. It has been called the greatest letter ever written. And as I said a couple weeks ago to introduce this chapter, if this is the greatest letter ever written, then Romans chapter 8 is the greatest chapter in the greatest letter that's ever been written. It covers the entire scope of the Christian life when you read it. And for those of you that are here each week, I really encourage you as we continue. We'll probably be in Romans 8 for another 3 weeks. And so take some time during the week to read Romans chapter 8. Your faith will be strengthened. Your hope will be energized. And so let me encourage you to do that. But it covers the entire scope of the Christian life. It begins with us being justified. Okay, so that everyone in Jesus has no condemnation. And it ends with us being glorified. So everyone that's justified in Jesus will be glorified. There will be no separation. Nothing can separate the believer from the love of God. And it's a chapter that's rich in theology. There's deep theological concepts like condemnation and redemption and adoption and foreknowledge. We're going to talk about the foreknowledge of God and predestination and justification and glorification. All big words I Googled right before this sermon, okay? So, it's all here. And last week, we learned about the radical nature of what happens when Christ saves you. That we are adopted as sons and daughters of God. And man, that just really ties in what we sang today. I love the way we opened with, I am who you say I am. Natalie led us with that song. And man, you know what? I am not what my feelings say I am. I am not what the accuser says I am. I am who you say I am. And nothing changes that because nothing separates the believer from the love of God. And so that's a good word for us, right? And that's last week. We're joint heirs with Christ. We have this inheritance that cannot pass away. And that adoption gives us unprecedented access to the Father because he is just that to us now, a Father. So Romans chapter 8, verse 18, look at it. We're going to read it here and jump into this text. For I consider, Paul says. So Paul's weighing it. He's weighing the cost of Christianity in a time where the church was being mowed down. Believers and pastors and teachers and all types of worshipers of the way were being mowed down because of the gospel. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, we groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for the adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Now one of the aspects of this passage, this text that gets your attention is Paul addresses the problem of pain and suffering. Contrary to what you might hear from people who maybe only have a surface knowledge of Scripture or simply are trying to attack the Bible addresses over and over again the current problem of pain and suffering that we experience and that we see. In this chapter, in this text, our text today is filled with it. This is a common question, and understandably so. Inevitably, when people find out that I'm a pastor, they'll ask me, well, why do good things or why do bad things happen to good people? And that's a good question. And folks that ask that in sincerity, I understand it. I get it. I wonder that myself. If there is a God, why is there pain and suffering in the world? Sometimes people ask that out of deep personal pain and deep personal hurt and sincerity. And sometimes, my brother-in-law in September, completely healthy 40-year-old male, died within 3 weeks of contracting COVID. And my nieces and nephews asked me that very thing. Why would God do that? And I do not have an answer for them. in that sense that I could just cross that off the list. This is why. Why is pain and suffering continuing in this world? Why do bad things happen to good people? Now, sometimes people out of skepticism ask me that. Like, oh, wow, I've never considered that in all my years as a Christian and a pastor. Wow, my faith is ruined because of your skeptical question. And of course, for people like that, I just pass that on. But it's worth considering. So 2004, the tsunami, estimated nearly 230,000 people died because of that tsunami. A third of those people were children. The current pandemic, COVID deaths worldwide are 5.5 million because of a brand new virus. Where was God in the tsunami? Where was God when my brother-in-law died? Sometimes Christians feel like this necessity that we only can whisper these questions. They're not allowed to be asked. But you are. You're allowed to ask those things of God. You may not get the answer you want, or you may not get it in the timing you want, but you're allowed to ask those things. We just covered that. Part of the point of that you and I have the access to God and we have the ability to call him Father, or we just covered that God is our Father and we're children of God, and so children are allowed to ask their dad why. Anybody that has a kid knows they love to ask that all the time. The point about coming to God as a child is not so that you can refer to him as Daddy God. Okay, if you want to do that, that's fine, okay? But that's not the point. The point is that children have zero fear of asking, for the most, outrageous things. That's what children are like, God, can I want this. Can I have this, Dad? What about this? Dad, why? Right? Why is this happening? Children have no pretense. You're their father. You're their mother. They think you can do everything. And so they ask you for things that are sometimes outrageous, but God actually can do everything. He is a God of the outrageous and the extraordinary. The point is that children have no pretense. And so you and I can come to the Father with no pretense. Why? Children have this uncanny ability to ask for anything with a straight face, believing that their parents can do it. One of my boys, we have twins, they're 18, they famously asked when they were 9, they saw a Lamborghini at a stoplight, hey, Dad, when I'm 16, that's what I want for my birthday. Hey, son, I also want six-pack abs, and neither of us are going to get either of those things anytime soon. Okay, so we're just going to deal with that, okay? But that's how we're allowed to approach God. Approaching him without pretense. Bold, massive requests that only he can do. It's part of that, and asking is also why. Not demanding, but why. It's a question in the Bible by David and Jeremiah and Job. So if you're wondering, when you see things that happen and you're wondering why, you're in good company, and it's okay. God is not afraid of your questions. You're not somehow not allowed to ask those things. The Bible does not shy away from the problem of pain. And there's no better example than in our text here in Romans chapter 8. Paul tells us to expect it. Verse 17, look at verse 17. Provided we suffer with him in order that we may be glorified with him. Verse 18, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to compare to the glory that is to be revealed to us. So what I like here is in dealing with the problem of pain, and the title of the sermon today is Birth Pains, and we'll get to that in a second. Paul pulls no punches. All the words, he embraces all of it, suffering and groaning and futility and bondage and corruption, decay and birth pains. It's an honest picture that Paul paints about real life on earth, and I'm here for all of it. Now, here's the first thing we need to look at, what Paul's saying here. Creation is groaning. Okay, creation is groaning. So creation was subjected to futility. Creation is in bondage to corruption. We're told here in this text that whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth. And so Paul is speaking about something that is clearly observable. When you look at our world, the people, the animals, the climate, the groaning of creation is clearly observable. And it has always been the case since the fall. It can be clearly seen. If you look around and say, something is wrong, something is broken, something is not what it is supposed to be, you are not blaspheming God. You are commenting on observable fact that Paul acknowledges right here. Something is clearly broken. Look, I have never, up until recently, ever been like an animal lover. Okay? Never really. Never, only with potatoes and gravy. Never in any other context, okay? Didn't really grow up in a family with pets, but as God often does with us, he has used my children, especially my daughter, to stretch me in this area. And so when Aubrey was much younger, one of the examples I was thinking of, there was this nesting pigeon, this pigeon just guarding her eggs, and Aubrey was just so worried. It was in this tree in our front yard. She was so worried that the pigeon wouldn't have water and food while it's protecting its little eggs. And so she made a bird feeder out of a plastic bottle and all these breadcrumbs, and she has this love for even the tiniest creatures. And God is growing me in this area because of that, giving me a glimpse of his love for even the tiniest of creatures. For a long time as a family, we held off getting a dog. And so what I would do to hold off my daughter with that is I would take her to the Petland or one of those stores that have the puppies, and you could play with them for 15 minutes. And so let her get her puppy fix, and she would just be in heaven. And so we finally did get a dog. But at the time, she'd be in heaven with these dogs. And, Daddy, look, it's puppy kisses. Let the doggy lick you. And I do it because I love my daughter. But inside, I'm thinking about where I saw that puppy licking 2 minutes ago. Okay, like, Dad, like, come on. At the time, I didn't get why people think puppy kisses are special. Oh, he likes you. They lick anything, and they lick everything. So it's not like you're special. Like, they lick everything. And now we have a dog. It's this little mini schnauzer mix. His name is Hulk. And now the tables have turned, and Aubrey sometimes like, you let him lick you too much. I'm like, be quiet. He loves me, okay? And it's her fault. She started it. So because of this love for animals in our house, we watched, especially when they were younger, we always watched these animal documentaries, and one that has always stood out is Discovery's The Frozen Planet. We watched it in the theater. And the emperor penguins, they're remarkable. But when the baby is young, it's not uncommon for female penguins who are childless to try to mother a baby that is not theirs. Okay? And so on this day in the documentary, a fight ensues between several of the penguins over this little baby penguin. And in the melee, the baby penguin is killed and it's crushed. And they're just showing all of that in this documentary. And it was disturbing even for me. My daughter's weeping, like audibly weeping during the show. Like, why do they do that? Why? Just brokenhearted. Why don't they stop? Something's wrong. And that's what Paul's saying. Creation is groaning. It's groaning in futility, in corruption. It's broken. Or take the grizzly, right? It's a species that's currently struggling to thrive. But if a male grizzly wants to mate with a female grizzly who has cubs, it is not uncommon for him to kill the cubs first. How messed up is that? And that's exactly what Paul's talking about here. Creation is broken. It's groaning. It's in bondage to corruption. It's fractured. It's not what it was, and it's not what it's going to be when the king returns and fixes it. But that's where we are. Paul says it's subjected to futility because of him who subjected it. What does he mean? He's talking about the garden, the curse. It means that creation now is unable to achieve the goal it was created to achieve. Well, why would God subject creation to futility? It's part of the curse. Genesis chapter 3. To Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. You shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. You're dust, and to dust you shall return. Originally, all of creation was a paradise, created with no suffering, created with no death, created with no decay, no disease, no weeds, no poisonous plants, no tuna fish casserole, and no kale. Like none of that stuff, okay? None of it. Nothing that could cause harm and misery. And then, because of Adam's sin, cursed is the ground. Creation's cursed because of your sin. And so then you're like, well, one man did that? They're like, that's not fair. And it's not. But it didn't just happen in the garden. We see the effects of one man's sin all the time. One man's sin led to the death of over 6 million Jews in Germany. One man's sin led to the killing fields in Cambodia. The sins of a few led to the suffering of 9/11. The entire world is currently in a pandemic because some dude thought it would be a great idea to eat a bat. Okay, like that's just where we are. Sometimes single people do things that have a ripple effect for everyone. And it's why God hates sin so much. And his children should too. Because since the garden, we've always downplayed the impact of sin. It won't really affect anybody else but me. It won't really bother anybody else. God says you'll die if you eat that fruit, but we're not really going to die. But sin never just affects one of us. It strains relationships, it ruins marriages, it destroys families, it closes churches, it affects the entire cosmos sometimes. And so now we're forced to deal with tsunamis and tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes and droughts and famines and animals that are fearful and violent. Do you understand that animals haven't always been afraid? Do you understand the original creation, it wasn't that way? Something that often gets passed over in the creation account in Genesis is the serpent is speaking to the woman. And she's not like, he's talking. Do you understand the significance of that? I am not saying that all of creation was able to communicate with Adam and Eve like they could understand, but I am saying that in the fall, something was broken. That God will restore. We see it in the prophetic passage, the lion will lay down with the lamb, right? Something was broken, communication was lost in the fall between us and even the animals. It's broken. What kind of God would do this? He didn't, we did. It's part of the wages of sin. And so creation is groaning for deliverance, and now we're told it waits with this eager longing. And the idea, the picture that Paul is kind of painting here is like you're in this crowd and you're craning your neck. You're trying to see fix this. When is the king coming back? Because something is not right, and we need you to fix it. And creation is straining its neck and craning and looking like great King Jesus, come on back and fix what we've broken. Creation is crying out, redeem us, restore us. Creation is groaning. Here's the second thing. Believers are groaning too. Verse 23, Paul adds to it. Look, not only creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, we groan inwardly as we wait. So contrary to what a health and wealth preacher would say, Christians are not exempt from current suffering and pain. Christians are not exempt from groaning. Paul says it right here. We too. There isn't some magical prayer you pray and boom, all of your dreams are fulfilled and all your troubles are gone. You can't just conceive it on the inside to receive it on the outside. Christians groan too from the weight of the curse. There is a heaviness and a misery to living in our fallen bodies and living in this fallen world. There is a deep sense in us that things are not as they should be. And one of the things that we learn from Romans chapter 8 is to silence our cell phones. And also, it's good. The vast majority of pain is not personal towards you. It's not because God's angry at you. It's because creation is groaning and believers are groaning. The vast majority of our suffering is because creation has been subjected to futility. So we experience brokenness and sickness and disease and death. Read a while back of a story about a pastor in Canada, had a daughter who's about 14, just a beautiful, precious girl that lit up every room that she entered, filled with joy and laughter and life. And she's walking home one day, and she is, in a random act of violence, strangled to death by a man. Just random act of violence. Who doesn't even run after it happens. And later in interrogations, like, no, I did it, and I'm just angry at life, and I wanted somebody else to pay. That was his actual answer for snuffing out the life of that beautiful, precious child of God. From a human standpoint, that's random. It's just evil. And now that pastor and his family, they live with it. Their email address still says family of 5. Reminds them that something's been broken. When they go to a restaurant and now they have a reservation for 4 instead of 5, every time it reminds them, God, why? The biblical writers ask the same thing. Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 1. Why do the way of the wicked prosper? Why do the faithless live at ease? Job chapter 21, why do the wicked live on, growing old and increasing in power? God, something is not right. Penguins aren't supposed to squish their young. Grizzlies aren't supposed to eat cubs in order to mate. Parents aren't supposed to end the life of infants so their career can stay on track. Along with creation, the children of God also groan under the weight of sin, and our hearts collectively cry out, fix this. Save us from the weight of this. We're on our tiptoes with our necks craned in anticipation. So why doesn't God fix it, Jason? When? And that's a great question. And I don't know when, but we wait in hope, and we sang about that today. I love that song. They sang promises, right? Like he's promising he's going to fix it. We're currently in the already not yet, right? Like redeemed as believers, and yet Christ is going to return, and he's going to restore this earth and this universe to its original glory, and even better than it was ever even originally created. He's going to do it, but when? And one of the best explanations for that I ever had was when the kids were little, we used to read the Jesus Storybook Bible. It's by Sally Lloyd-Jones, and you parents of little ones, find it and get it. Because I'll tell you what, I read that through with the kids several times, and I took notes. It's the best description at times of the overall purpose of the plan of God that I've ever seen. So the Bible is a story of God's rescue plan, and Genesis 1-3 is about how we messed it all up. We broke it. And Genesis 3 to Revelation is about God's plan to redeem it, to restore it, to repair it. And in all my study and all my training, which was 2 weeks on an internet course, nobody has ever explained this more deeply than Sally Lloyd-Jones in the Jesus Storybook Bible. This is what she tells little ones as they read this. The Bible isn't a book of rules or a book of heroes. The Bible is most of all a story. It's an adventure story about a young hero who comes from a far country to win back his lost treasure. It's a love story about a brave prince who leaves his palace, his throne, everything to rescue the one he loves. There are lots of stories in the Bible, but all of the stories are telling one big story. The story how God loves his children and comes to rescue them. Christians are groaning, and we're waiting for the King to return. Here's the last thing, and we're done, okay? We currently then are living in what Paul calls the birth pains of deliverance. So Paul says, for I consider the sufferings of this present time, verse 18, are not worth comparing with the glory to be revealed to us. It continues on, the whole creation has been groaning in the pains of childbirth. We wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. In this hope we were saved. We wait for it with patience. And so considering current suffering, Paul says, I consider, and he is calculating it. He's calculating the cost. I've considered the facts, and any suffering we endure right now is a small price to pay for the glory that's coming. And we have to make it clear that Paul is not minimizing suffering. That is not a Christian practice to be like, oh, you're suffering, you think you got it bad, you don't. Paul is not doing that. He is not dismissing it. We need to make clear what Paul endured for the cause of Christ. As of writing this, 2 shipwrecks, multiple beatings, a viper bite, a stoning where he was believed to be dead. And ultimately, Paul loses his head for the gospel of Jesus. Paul knew suffering, and yet he counts the cost. He has this clear vision of what's coming. And Paul is saying when we compare our current suffering to what's coming, it's so worth it. That's what he's saying. He's given every one of us a vision of hope, of endurance, of courage. Now, the example that Paul compares it to is, quite frankly, really dangerous territory. He compares it to childbirth. And even with the title of this sermon today, Rachel was like, well, you're getting kind of bold there to talk about childbirth, right, Jason? And every self-respecting man knows it's dangerous to go down that road. We all know that we do not bring up our war wounds with women around. Oh, you broke your arm? 27 hours of labor. Oh, you need a drink? I needed a drink during 27 hours of labor, and I had one cracker, and I ate ibuprofen like it was candy, okay? We know this. Oh, your kidney hurts? My kidney hurt for 9 months as I carried your son, who used it as a punching bag. And I have to say, I was in the room for all three of well, it was really two births because we had twins and then our daughter Aubrey. I was in there for both of them, and Ginger had a C-section, and I do have to say how absolutely tough and enduring my wife was in all of that. In those C-section, I was sitting there, and I began to notice there was this nurse that went everywhere I went. And she kept asking me, are you doing okay? And I'm like, why are you asking me that? Like, she's the one under the knife. Like, she kept following me, and she kept watching me, and are you okay? Do you need a drink, or do you need anything? And finally, I'm like, yes, I'm fine. And then I find out from her, oh, no, see, dads faint all the time. And so actually, we assign one nurse in every C-section just to the dad, because they often pass out, and we try to catch them, and it's like, dude, we are so weak, guys. Like, we are so weak, so weak. So it's a bold move to compare what we're going through with birth pains, but there's a reason for it. What's his point to compare this present suffering with birth pains? It's because it's the pain of something that is so incredibly intense, yet we know at the end of that, there's great joy and hope. That's why he uses this picture. It's about to produce. Those pains are producing something. They're delivering something that is life-changing. Paul says they're birth pains. Listen, there are different types of cries when it comes to pain in a hospital. And when you walk down a hospital ward, as I've done many, many times as a pastor, there are cries that put a pit in your stomach. But when you walk down a labor and delivery wing and you hear those cries, those groanings, that's a cry that joy is coming, that life is coming. It brings excitement and anticipation, because then the next thing is the cry of that little one. Yes, life can be extremely hard, Christian, but all of that pain, Paul is saying, is birth pains. And we know they're intense. He's not dismissing that, but it's producing something. It's delivering something. Something coming that is so wonderful, that is really too great for words. We currently then are enduring the birth pains of deliverance. So Paul says, we wait eagerly for these birth pains to pass. We wait eagerly for the joy of deliverance. We wait eagerly for fully transformed bodies. We wait for the day when God redeems these bodies that are scarred by sin, bodies that are tormented by disease and death. We laid to rest yesterday Ernie Hoover, just a lion in this church for decades. Body recently ravaged by old age and dementia. You cannot replace Ernie Hoover. It will be a hole in our church for as long as this church stands. But one day Jesus is coming to fix all of it. There's a day coming that bodies will no longer be tormented by disease and death, ravaged by dementia, or ravaged by pancreatic cancer. Your present sufferings are certainly immensely painful, but even your time, even in the oncology ward, Paul says they're all birth pains. We wait eagerly for the redemption of our bodies. Nothing you and I experience now is as God originally created or intended it. Everything that we experience in creation is scarred by sin. So as magnificent as creation is, and it truly is, it's decaying. It's one writer describes it as like the smoldering remains of what it was before sin and what it will be when Jesus returns. There's this viral video that's been out for quite a while of this dad who was colorblind from birth. And he's never seen anything other than black and white. He's never seen color. And his family buys him a pair of these extremely expensive Enchroma glasses that allows somebody who is colorblind to see like we see every day and take for granted. And so the dad comes out and they give him these glasses and he's somewhat indifferent, like, what could these do? And this is kind of silly. And he puts them on and words fail him. Like this grown man, his hands are shaking, because he sees leaves. He keeps saying the leaves, the green. He sees color for the first time. He's overcome with emotion. And you watch it and you get a glimpse of what these birth pains are going to produce. You've never seen the color blue like it's truly intended to be. The entire universe has been twisted and scarred by sin. You've never tasted an apple like it's truly intended to be. Even bacon is not as good as it's going to be on the new heaven and the new earth. And then Jesus. Imagine the throne and the lion, lamb. It's coming. It's coming. No more tumors, No more seizures, no more COPD, no more PTSD, no more horrific car accidents, no more violence, no more ventilators. So we do not lose heart, because these pains are intense, but they're pains of deliverance. This is why Christians should not look at current events with fear and trembling. If you and I are looking at current events and succumbing to fear, we're not looking at it through the correct lens. I finished this fascinating book in World War II about these soldiers who survived the Bataan Death March in the Philippines. And they survived only to suffer just terrible treatment at the hands of the Japanese in POW camps for years. And as the U.S. began to retake the Pacific, the prisoners that had survived the death march and then survived that camp for years, they began to notice there were signs of change. The U.S. Air Force began to fly near the camp, began to fly over the camp, began to buzz the camp, sometimes strafe certain parts of the camp, and then a plane comes the Japanese had never seen, the soldiers neither. It was a state-of-the-art, the P-51 is kind of what turned the war in the air, and there was a state-of-the-art new version of the P-51 called a Black Widow. It was the first night fighter. It began to dive bomb the camp, not bombing, but just diving and buzzing. And so there's a difference between the guards and the prisoners, because the Japanese had never seen such a sophisticated aircraft. It terrified them. These guards that were merciless, they were cowering in fear on top of each other, wetting themselves as this P-51 would dive down at them. But for the prisoners, this was joy. It was the first evidence, the first birth pains of deliverance. Listen to me, if you are looking at the signs of the time and you're thinking, the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, you're thinking like a prison guard who's facing a reckoning instead of a prisoner who's about to be delivered. In all the Christian love I can say, get a theological grip. Think return of the King. That's what Paul says. These are the birth pains of deliverance. And for you, Christian, it means deliverance. It means the King is coming to fix what sin has destroyed and twisted forever. We endure these birth pains that seem to go on and on and on, but they amount to only the very first pages. The introduction of the grand adventure, the greatest story that has ever been told. And as good soldiers of Jesus Christ, we live in what theologians call the already not yet. We're already justified. We've already been saved, but that salvation from sin and death happens later. The down payment of this inheritance is the Holy Spirit living inside of us, and it's not yet complete. So march on. Lean in. It's time for courage and joy and living for the eternal, knowing that these birth pains are bringing something beyond words. It is bringing a story in which every chapter is better than the one that comes before. God grant us courage and hope. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we thank you for your word. Grant us hope, Lord. Help us to rest it solely and solidly in the work of Jesus. We testify along with creation. We need you to fix this. Something is not right. Lord, help us not to have a spirit of fear. Help us to have a rock-solid, unshakable joy, even as we endure at times intense pain, knowing it's producing. It's signs that the King is coming. Give us grace, Lord, to endure with hope, to lean in with courage, and to love fiercely like Jesus loves us. The instruments are going to play, and here's your time to speak with God, and maybe you're here and you're not a Christian, and so your prayer is, Father, save me. Be merciful to me. Forgive me. And you can have that salvation today. You can be part of the family of God today. Those pains that you're experiencing now would then be transformed to pains of deliverance. So maybe that's your prayer. Maybe you're here, Christian, and you're hurting and you're limping. And so your prayer is, Father, give me endurance. Help me to set my eyes and my hope on your promises. Help me to believe your promises. The instruments play. Here's the time. Speak with God.